Chapter 9. Saturday afternoon. Norman shaved. He shaved only once a week, and always on a Saturday. Norman didn't like to shave because of the mirror. It had those wavy lines in it. All mirrors seemed to have wavy lines that hurt his eyes. Maybe the real trouble was that his eyes were bad. Yes, that was it, because he remembered how he used to enjoy looking in the mirror as a boy. He liked to stand in front of the glass without any clothes on. One time, Mother caught him at it and hit him on the side of his head with the big silver-handled hairbrush. She hit him hard, and it hurt. Mother said that was a nasty thing to do, to look at yourself that way. He could still remember how it hurt and how his head ached afterwards. From then on, it seemed he got a headache almost every time he looked in a mirror. Mother finally took him to the doctor, and the doctor said he needed glasses. The glasses helped, but he still had trouble seeing properly when he gazed into a mirror. So after a while, he just didn't, except when he couldn't help it. And Mother was right. It was a nasty thing to stare at yourself all naked and unprotected, to peek at the blubbery fat, the short hairless arms, the big belly, and underneath it. When you did, you wished you were somebody else, somebody who was tall and lean and handsome, like Uncle Joe Considine. Isn't he the best-looking figure of a man you ever saw? Mother used to remark. It was the truth, too, and Norman had to admit it. But he still hated Uncle Joe Considine, even if he was so handsome, and he wished Mother wouldn't insist on calling him Uncle Joe, because he wasn't any real relation at all, just a friend who came around to visit Mother, and he got her to build the motel, too, after she sold the farm acreage. That was strange. Mother always talked against men, and about your father who ran off and deserted me, and yet Uncle Joe Considine could wrap her around his little finger. He could do anything he wanted with Mother. It would be nice to be like that and to look the way Uncle Joe Considine looked. Oh no, it wouldn't, because Uncle Joe was dead. Norman blinked at his reflection as he shaved. Funny how it had slipped his mind. Why, it must have been almost 20 years now. Time is relative, of course. Einstein said so, and he wasn't the first to discover it. The ancients knew it too, and so did some of the modern mystics like Aleister Crowley and Ouspensky. Norman had read them all, and he even owned some of the books. Mother didn't approve. She claimed that those things were against religion, and that wasn't the real reason. It was because when he read the books, he wasn't her little boy anymore. He was a grown man, a man who studied the secrets of time and space and mastered the secrets of dimension and being. It was like being two people, really the child and the adult. Whenever he thought about Mother, he became the child again, with the child's vocabulary, frames of reference, and emotional reactions. But when he was by himself, well, not actually by himself, but off in a book, he was a mature individual, mature enough to understand that he might even be the victim of a mild form of schizophrenia, most likely some form of borderline neurosis. Granted, it wasn't the healthiest situation in the world. Being Mother's little boy had its drawbacks. On the other hand, as long as he recognized the dangers, he could cope with them. And with Mother, it was just lucky for her that he knew when to be a man. Then he did know a few things about psychology, and parapsychology too. It had been lucky when Uncle Joe Considine died, and it was lucky again last week when the girl came along. If he hadn't acted as an adult, Mother would be in real trouble right now. Norman fingered the razor. It was sharp, very sharp. He had to be careful not to cut himself. Yes, and he had to be careful to put it away when he finished shaving, to lock it up where Mother couldn't hold on to it. He couldn't trust Mother with anything that sharp. That's why he did most of the cooking, and the dishes too. Mother still loved to clean house. Her own room was always neat as a pin, but Norman always took charge of the kitchen. Not that he ever said anything to her outright. He just took over. She never questioned him either, and he was glad of that. Things had gone along for a whole week now since the girl had come last Saturday, and they hadn't discussed the affair at all. It would have been awkward and embarrassing for both of them. Mother must have sensed it, for it seemed as if she was deliberately avoiding him. She spent a lot of time just resting in her room and didn't have much to say. Probably her conscience bothered her, and that was as it should be. Murder was a terrible thing. Even if you're not quite right in the head, you can realize that much. Mother must be suffering quite a bit. Perhaps catharsis would help her, but Norman was glad she hadn't spoken, because he was suffering too. It wasn't conscience that plagued him, it was fear. All week long he waited for something to go wrong. Every time a car drove into the motel driveway, he just about jumped out of his skin. Even when cars merely dropped past on the old highway, it made him nervous. Last Saturday, of course, he finished cleaning up back there at the edge of the swamp. He took his own car down there and loaded the trailer with wood, and by the time he finished there wasn't anything left that would look suspicious. The girl's earring had gone into the swamp too, and the other one hadn't shown up, so he felt reasonably secure. But on Thursday night, when the state highway patrol car pulled into the driveway, he almost passed out. The officer just wanted to use the phone. Afterward, Norman was able to laugh to himself, yet at the time it wasn't a joke at all. Mother had been sitting at her window in the bedroom, and it was just as well the officer hadn't seen her. Mother had looked out of the window a lot during the past week. Maybe she was worried about visitors, too. Norman tried to tell her to stay out of sight, but he could bring himself to explain why, and more than he could discuss with her why he wouldn't permit her to come down to the motel and help Nut. He just saw it that she didn't. The house was the place where she belonged. You couldn't trust Mother around strangers, not anymore, and the less they knew about her, the better. He should never have told that girl. Norman finished shaving and washed his hands again. He noticed this compulsion in himself, particularly during the past week. Guilt feelings, a regular Lady Macbeth. Shakespeare had known a lot about psychology. Norman wondered if he had known other things too. There was the ghost of Hamlet's father, for example. No time to think about that now. He had to get down to the motel and open up. There'd been some business during the week, not very much. Norman never had more than 3 or 4 units occupied on a given night, and that was good. It meant he didn't need to rent out number 6. Number 6 had been the girls' room. He hoped he'd never have to rent it out. He was done with that sort of thing, the peeking, the voyeurism. That's what was caused all the trouble in the first place. If he hadn't peeked, if he hadn't been drinking, no sense crying over spilt milk, no. Even if he hadn't been, milk, Norman wiped his hands, turned away from the mirror. Forget the past, let the dead bury the dead. Things were working out fine, and that was the only thing he had to remember. Mother was behaving herself. He was behaving himself. They were together as they always have been. A whole week had gone by without any trouble, and there wouldn't be any trouble from now on, particularly if he held firm to his resolve to behave like an adult instead of a child, a mama's boy, and he already made up his mind about that. He tightened his tie and left the bathroom. Mother was in her room, looking out of the window again. Norman wondered if he ought to say anything to her. No, better not. There might be an argument, and he wasn't quite ready yet to face her. Let her look if she liked. Poor old sick old lady, chained to the house here. Let her watch the world go by. That was the child speaking, of course, but he was willing to make such a concession as long as he behaved like a sensible adult, as long as he locked the downstairs doors when he went out. It was like locking the doors all week long, which gave him his sense of security. He'd taken her keys away from her, too, the keys to the house and the keys to the motel. Once he left, there was no way she could get out. She was safe in the house, and he was safe in the motel. There could be no repetition of what had happened last week as long as he observed the precaution. After all, It was for her own good. Better the house than an asylum. Norman walked down the path and came around the corner towards his office, just as the towel service truck drove up on its weekly rounds. He had everything ready for the driver. He accepted the fresh supply and gave him the old dirty linen. The towel service handled the laundering of sheets and pillowcases too. That made it simple. Actually, there was no trick to operating a motel these days. After the truck departed, Norman went in and cleaned up number 4. Some traveling salesman from up in Illinois had pulled out earlier in the day. Left the usual mess too, cigarette butts on the edge of the wash bowl, and a magazine on the floor next to the toilet seat. One of those science fiction things. Norman chucked as he picked it up. Science fiction. If they only knew. But they didn't know. They never know. And they must not know. As long as he was careful about Mother, there'd be no risk. He had to protect her, and he had to protect others. What had happened last week proved it. From now on, he'd be extra careful, always, for everyone's sake. Norman walked back to the office and put the towels away. There was already a fresh supply of linen in every unit. He was ready for today's business, if any. But nothing happened until around 4 o'clock. He sat there watching the roadway outside, and he got bored and fidgety. He was almost tempted to take a drink until he remembered what he promised himself. No more drinking. That was part of the trouble. When there was trouble. He couldn't afford to drink, not even a drop. Drinking had killed Uncle Joe Constantine. Drinking had led to the killing of the girl indirectly. So from now on, he'd be a teetotaler. Still, he could use a drink now. Just one. Norman was still hesitating when the car pulled in. Alabama plates. A middle-aged couple climbed out and came into the office. The man was bald and wore heavy, dark-rimmed glasses. The woman was fat and perspiring. Norman showed them number 1, way to the other end for $10 double. The woman complained about the stuffiness in his high, whining drawl, but she seemed satisfied when Norman switched on the fan. The man took their bags and signed the register. Mr. and Mrs. Herman Pritzler, Birmingham, Alabama. Oh, they were just tourists. They wouldn't present any problems. Norman sat down again, riffling the pages of the science fiction magazine he found. The light was dim. Must be around 5 o'clock now. He switched on the lamp. Another car rolled in, up to the drive, with a lone man behind the wheel. Probably another salesman, a green Buick. Texas license. Texas license? That girl, that Jane Wilson had come from Texas. Norman stood up and stepped behind the counter. He saw the man leave the car, heard the crunch of his approaching footsteps on the gravel, matched the rhythm with time muffled thumping of his own heart. It's just coincidence, he told himself. People drive up from Texas every day. Why, Alabama is even further away. The man entered. He was tall and thin, and he was one of those gray Stetson hats with the broad brim that shadowed the upper portion of his face. His chin showed tan under the heavy stubble of beard. "Good evening," he said, without much of a drawl. "Good evening." Norman shifted his feet uneasily underneath the counter. "You the proprietor here?" "Well, that's right." "Would you like a room?" "Well, not exactly. I'm looking for a little information." "Oh, I'll be glad to help if I can. What is it you wanted to know?" "I'm trying to locate a girl." Norman's hands twitched. He could feel them because they were going numb. He was numb all over. His heart wasn't pounding anymore. It didn't even seem to be beating. Everything was quiet. Oh, God, it would be terrible if he screamed. "Her name is Crane," the man said. "Mary Crane from Fort Worth, Texas. I was wondering if she might have registered here." Norman didn't want to scream now. He wanted to laugh. He could feel his heart resume its normal function again. It was easy to reply. "Oh, no," he said. "There hasn't been anybody by that name here." "You sure?" "Positive. We don't get too much business these days. I'm pretty good at remembering my customers. This girl would have stopped over about a week ago, last Saturday night. Or Sunday. I didn't have anyone here over the weekend. Weather was bad in these parts." "Are you sure? This girl, woman, I should say, is about 27, 5 feet 5, weighs about 120, dark hair, blue eyes. She drives a 1953 Plymouth sedan, a blue Tudor with a stove in front fender on the right side. The license number is. Norman stopped listening. Why had he said there hadn't been anyone here? The man was describing that girl, all right. He knew all about her. Damn it. Well, he still couldn't prove the girl had come if Norman denied it, and he had to keep on denying now. No, I don't think I can help you. Doesn't that description fit anyone who's been here during the past week? It's quite likely she would have registered under another name. Perhaps if you let me look over your register for a minute. Norman put his hands on the ledger and shook his head. Sorry, mister, he said. I couldn't let you do that. Maybe this will change your mind. The man reached into his inside coat pocket, and for a minute Norman wondered if he was going to offer him some money. The wallet came out, but the man didn't remove any bills. Instead, he flipped it open and laid it on the counter so Norman could read the card. Milton Abergast, the man said, investigator for Parity Mutual. You're a detective? He nodded. I'm here on business, Mr. Norman Bates. Mr. Bates, my company wants me to locate this girl, and I appreciate your cooperation. Of course, if you refuse to let me inspect your register, I can always get in touch with the local authorities. I guess you know that. Norman didn't know that, but he was sure of one thing. There mustn't be any local authorities to come snooping around. He hesitated, his hands still covering the ledger. What's this all about? He asked. What did this girl do? Stolen car? Mr. Abergast told him. Oh, Norman was a little bit more relieved. For a moment, he'd been afraid it was something serious, that the girl was missing or wanted for some major offense. In that case, there'd be a real investigation. But a missing car, particularly an old beat-up heap like that one. All right, he said. Help yourself. I just wanted to make sure you had the legitimate reason. He removed his hand. It's legitimate, all right. But Mr. Abergast didn't reach for the register right away. First, he took an envelope out of his pocket and laid it down on the counter. Then he grabbed the ledger, turned it around, and thumbs down the list of signatures. Norman watched his blunt thumb move, saw it stop suddenly and decisively. I thought you said something about not having any customers last Saturday or Sunday. Well, I don't recall anyone. I mean, we might have had one or two, but there was not real any big business. How about this one, this Jane Wilson from San Antonio? She signed in on Saturday night. Oh, come to think of it, you're right. The pounding had started up in Norman's chest again, and he knew he made a mistake when he pretended not to recognize the description, but it was too late now. How could he possibly explain in such a way so that the detective wouldn't be suspicious? What was he going to say? Right now, the detective wasn't saying anything. He had picked up the envelope and laid it alongside the ledger page, comparing the handwriting. That's why he brought the envelope out. It was in her handwriting. Now he knows. Oh, damn it, he did know. Norman could tell it when the detective raised his head and stared at him. Here, close up, he could see beneath the shadow cast by the hat brim. He could see the cold eyes, the eyes that knew. It's the girl, all right. This handwriting is identical. It is? Are you sure? Sure enough that I'm going to get a photostat made, even if it takes a court order. And that isn't all I can do. If you won't start talking and tell me the truth, why did you lie about not seeing the girl? Well, I didn't lie, I just forgot. You said you had a good memory. Well, yes, generally I do, only... Prove it! Mr. Abergast lit a cigarette. In case you don't know, car theft is a federal offense. You wouldn't want to be involved as an accessory, would you? Involved? How could I be involved? A girl drives in here, she takes a room, spends the night, and drives away again. How can I possibly be involved? By withholding information. Mr. Abergast inhaled deeply. Come on now, let's have it. You saw the girl. What did she look like? Just as you described her, I guess. It was raining hard when she came in. I was busy. I didn't really take a second look at her. I let her sign in, gave her keys, and that was that. Did she say anything? What did she talk about? Oh, the weather, I suppose. I don't remember. Did she seem ill or at ease or out of ease in any way? Was there anything about her that made you look at her suspiciously? Oh, nothing at all. She seemed just like any other tourist to me. Well, good enough. Mr. Abergast ground his cigarette butt into the ashtray. Didn't impress you one way or the other, eh? On one hand, there was nothing to cause you to suspect anything was wrong with her. Arid, on the other, she didn't particularly arouse your sympathies either. I mean, you feel no emotion toward this girl at all? Well, certainly not. Mr. Abergast leaned forward casually. Then why did you try to shield her by pretending you never remembered that she had come here? I didn't try. I just forgot, I tell you. Norman knew he'd walked into a trap, but he wasn't going any further. What are you trying to insinuate? Do you think I helped her steal the car? Nobody's accusing you of anything, Mr. Bates. It's just that I need all the facts I can get. You said she came alone. She came alone. She took a room. She left the next morning. She's probably 1,000 miles away by now. Probably. Mr. Albrecht smiled. But let's take it a little slower, shall we? Maybe you can remember something. She left alone, is that it? About what time would you say? Well, I don't know. I was asleep at the house on Sunday morning. Then you don't actually know she was alone when she left. Well, I can't prove it, if that's what you mean. How about during the evening? Did she have any visitors? No? You're positive? Well, quite positive. Did anyone else happen to see her here that night? No, she was the only customer. And you were on duty alone. That's right. She stayed in her room? Yes. All evening? Didn't even make a phone call? Well, of course not. So you're the only one who knew she was here at all. I've already told you that. What about the old lady? Did she see her? What old lady? The one up in the house and back of here. Norman could feel the pounding now. His heart was going to beat its way right through his chest. He started to say, there is no old lady, but Mr. Albrecht was still talking. I noticed her staring out the window when I drove in. Who is she? Oh, I'm sorry. That's my mother. He had to admit it. There was no way out. No way out, he could explain. She's pretty feeble. She never comes down here anymore. Then she didn't see the girl? No, she's sick. She stays in her room when I ate sup. It slipped out, just like that. Damn it. Because Mr. Albrecht had asked the question too fast. He'd done it on purpose just to confuse him. And when he mentioned mother, it caught Norman off guard. He thought only about protecting her, and now Mr. Albrecht wasn't casual anymore. Oh, so you had supper with Mary Crane up in your house. Oh, just coffee and sandwiches. I thought I told you. It wasn't anything. You see, she asked where she could eat, and I said Fairvale, but that's almost 20 miles away, and it was raining really hard, so I took her up to the house with me. That's all there was to it. What did you talk about? We didn't talk about anything. I told you Mother's sick, and I didn't want to disturb her. She's been sick all week. I guess that's what's been upsetting me, making me forget things, like this girl and having supper. It just slipped my mind. Is there anything else that might have slipped your mind, like, say, you and this girl coming back here and having a little party? No, nothing like that. How can you say such a thing? What right have you to say such a thing about me? I won't even talk to you anymore. I told you all I wanted to know. Now get it out of here. Get out of here. All right. Mr. Albrecht pulled down the brim of his Stetson. I'll be on my way, but first I'd like to have a word with your mother. Maybe she might have noticed something you've forgotten. I tell you, she didn't even see the girl. Norman came around the corner. Besides, you can't talk to her. She's very ill. He could hear his heart pounding, and he had to shout above it. I forbid you to see her. In that case, I'll come back with a search warrant. He was bluffing. Norman knew it now. That's ridiculous. Nobody's issued one. Who believe I'd steal an old car? Mr. Albrecht lit another cigarette and threw the match into the ashtray. I'm afraid you don't understand, he said, almost gently. It isn't really the car at all. You might as well have the whole story. This girl, Mary Crane, stole $40,000 in cash from a real estate firm in Fort Worth. 40,000. That's right. Skip town with the money. You can see it's serious business. That's why everything I can find out is important. That's why I'm going to insist on talking to your mother. With or without your permission. But I've always told you she doesn't know anything. And she's not well. She's not well at all. I promise I won't say anything to upset her. Mr. Albrecht paused. Of course, if you want me to come back with the sheriff and a warrant. Oh, no. Norman shook his head hastily. You mustn't do that. He hesitated, but there was nothing to hesitate about now. $40,000. No wonder he'd asked so many questions. Of course he could get a warrant. No use making a scene. And besides, there was the Alabama couple down the line. No way out. No way at all. Oh, okay, all right, Norman said. You can talk to her, but let me go up to the house first and tell her you're coming. I don't want you bursting in without any explanation and scaring her and getting her all excited. He moved toward the door. "You wait here, in case anyone drives in." "Okay." Arbogast nodded, and Norman hurried out. It wasn't much of a climb up the hill, and he thought he'd never make it. His heart was pounding the way it had the other night, and it was just like the other night now. Nothing had changed. No matter what you did, you couldn't get away from it. Not by trying to behave like a good boy, and not by trying to behave like an adult either. Nothing helped, because B was what he was, and that wasn't enough. Not enough to save him, and not enough to save Mother. If there was going to be any help at all now, it would have to come from her. Then he unlocked the front door and climbed the stairs and went into her room, and he intended to speak to her very calmly. But when he just saw her just sitting there by the window, he couldn't hold it back. He began to shake and sob, and tears came to his chest, terrible sobs, and he put his head down against her skirt, and he told her, "All right, Mom. Mother said." She didn't seem surprised at all. "We'll take care of this. Just leave everything to me." "Mother, if you just talk to him for a minute, told him you don't know anything, he's going to go away then." "But he come back. $40,000, that's a lot of money. Why didn't you tell me about it?" "Well, I didn't know. I swear it, I didn't know." "I believe you. Only he won't. He won't believe you, and he won't believe me. He probably thinks we're all in it together, or that we did something nasty to that little girl because of the money. Don't you see how it is?" "Mother," he closed his eye. He couldn't look at her. "What are you going to do, Mommy?" "I'm going to get dressed. We want to be all ready for your visitor, don't we? I just take some things into the bathroom. You can go back and tell this Mr. Arbogast to come up now." "No, I can't. I won't bring him up here, not if you're going to..." And he couldn't move at all now. He wanted to faint, but even that wouldn't stop what was going to happen. In just a few minutes, Mr. Arbogast would get tired of waiting. He'd walk up to the house alone. He'd knock on the door. He'd open it and come in, and when he did, "Mother, please listen to me." But she didn't listen. She was in the bathroom. She was getting dressed. She was putting on makeup. She was getting ready. And all at once she came gliding out wearing the nice dress with the ruffles. Her face was freshly powdered and rouged. She was so pretty as a picture, and she smiled as she started down the stairs. Before she was in the hallway door, the knocking came. It was happening. Mr. Arbogast was here. He wanted to call out and warn him, but something was stuck in his throat. He could only listen as Mother cried gaily, "I'm coming! I'm coming!" Just as a moment now. And it was just a moment. Mother opened the door and Mr. Arbogast walked in. He looked at her and then he opened his mouth to say something. As he did so, he raised his head, and that was Mother had been waiting for. Her arm went out and something bright and glittering flashed back and forth. It hurt Norman's eyes and he didn't want to look. He didn't have to look either because he already knew Mother had found his razor.